Hey, this is Marti MacGibbon, host of KICKASS Personal Transformation, and I am so stoked about my guest tonight. His name is Chris Thrall, and he's an international best-selling author, a former Royal Marine Commando, adventure and expedition leader who's traveled across 80 countries and 7 continents. He's done Antarctic exploring and polar diving. Pilot, skydiver, marathon runner, ski snowboarder, substance abuse specialist, and many other things. It's absolutely wonderful, and I am so stoked. I am such a fan. Chris, I am such a fan. I have read your book, Eating Smoke, which is a wonderful addiction memoir. And I want to talk about your book. And I also want to talk about you and your life in recovery. So welcome, Chris.
Thank you for having me, Marti. It's a pleasure.
Oh, it's the privilege is all mine. So can I just tell them a little bit about your I just want to run over your bio just really quickly for the audience.
Yeah,
Chris
I was going to say, Marti, I should point out right now that I don't do all those things simultaneously.
That's good. Yes,
just some of my some of my achievements.
You know, I actually left out several of them, and I was maybe going to save them for later. But I just was running down this list of all your experiences, and I think it's really powerful because I know that these have been experiences that you've had after addiction. Am I right?
Yes, pretty much for the most part. Obviously, not my career in the Royal Marines, but pretty much the rest of it. Yeah.
Yes, and that's why you are what we call here in the U.S. a badass, and I mean that in the highest. It's the highest form of praise coming from me. And I really love the fact that you are, you're so courageous. And I know, I think having read your book, and I want to tell people, I just take a chance to, this book is called Eating Smoke. And it's so honest and vulnerable and funny and amazing. It's very well written. And it as I said, it's an international bestseller. Let me just say, born in the UK, and he joined the Royal Marine Commandos at 18. That's kind of like our special forces. Following active service in Northern Ireland and following his training in Arctic warfare and survival, he earned his parachutist wings and went to serve as part of a high-security detachment on board an aircraft carrier. But in 1995, Chris moved to Hong Kong to oversee the Asia-Pacific expansion of a successful network marketing operation he built part-time while serving in the forces. But less than a year later, he was homeless and in psychosis from crystal meth addiction and working for the 14K, a Hong Kong triad crime family, as a doorman in the infamous Wan Chai red light district. So Eating Smoke, his memoir, is his account of what happened. And I was partly reading your bio because it's just so good. Chris, what do you have to tell us? Our listeners are people in recovery or people interested in recovery, and let's talk about it, okay?
Sure.
So you're an addiction treatment professional.
Yeah, I'm not at the moment. I'm full-time writing at the moment. I've decided to write a novel.
Yes.
As you probably know with your own writing, Marti, you think these things are going to take you a month, then you think these things are going to take 2 months, and then over a year later, you're still trying to get the darn thing finished.
Yes.
So I've been writing full-time for the last 6 months, but prior to that, yes, I was an addiction treatment specialist for 3 years, working in a centre here in my hometown, which is Plymouth in the UK. I guess I was able to put both my experiences and education to use trying to support others.
Yes.
but as you know, as we both know, it's a very challenging area of work.
Yes, it is. Yeah, I have worked in recovery, and I still hold my certifications. I maintain my education, so I'm still active, but I'm not working in the facilities currently. So I know what you mean. I have done that work, and it is challenging. It's also really rewarding. Do you feel like with your own story, I found that you had a tremendous amount of courage, and I think we all do. To be able to come into recovery takes so much courage. And I think it takes a lot of courage to tell our stories. I know all of us that are in recovery find that there's a certain point where we're going to have to share our story. You know, and a lot of us are scared. I know I was scared the first time somebody asked me to share in with a group, you know, a group of like-minded individuals. And I thought, oh my gosh, what am I going to say? But then I just began to open up and share the experience, strength, and hope, and I found that I was just one of many. We have so many common experiences. In your book, though, with it being, you know, because you were in this other country and a completely different culture, and in your, as you went down the downward spiral. You know, I really appreciated reading it because I had a horrific experience in another country, in Japan, and but I found it really, really valuable. You know, reading your memoir, because you had such you were so alive all the way through it, and the story. You know, just embracing the other culture, you know, and making friends with the nationals where you were, and not hiding, you know, not isolating yourself in a group of expats, but really just experiencing. Yeah. And I know maybe there was a danger there, was there? Like, because you ended up embracing the drug, but then at the same time, there's so much value to you as a person in this memoir. I mean, I was really. I found you very, very likable.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I should tell your listeners kind of how my story unfolded.
Yes, please.
I spent 7 years in the Marines. It's as in the US, you know, the military's quite well regarded here in the UK. The Marines are considered an elite force, which is quite rightly so, because it's a very long training. It's 32 weeks. To become a commando, you have to pass all kind of rigorous, you know, physical and mental tests. And I got my, or I should say, I earned my Green Beret, and I went straight out to the Northern Ireland conflict, which was obviously going on at the time. We're talking 20 years ago now. That was quite a violent experience, but from a military point of view, it was very exciting, quite fun actually. A lot of the time, you know, for a young man who had previously had no direction in life. I was fortunate to fly out to Norway for 3 months and undergo Arctic training, which was really enjoyable. We skied, you know, obviously skied on exercise. We lived in snow caves. We had to do this drill where you break the ice on a lake and you have to jump in with all your equipment on and then get yourself out using only your ski poles. Then I was, yeah, that was cold, really, really cold. And then I was fortunate. On all the British ships in our Navy, there's a small detachment of Marines, which is both a functional thing and a historical thing. So I joined a bunch of 12 Marines on one of our aircraft carriers, and we sailed around the world for a year. And then I settled on a draft here in my hometown in Plymouth. It was at the time when the dance scene was really kicking off, you know, you can say the rave generation.
Yeah.
So
the 90s.
A few of us early 90s. So a few of us started going out, and as you do, you get introduced to substances, and to be honest, it was really great fun.
Yes, it is at the beginning, isn't it?
Yeah, of course. You're getting the payback initially, and it makes it all worth it. And of course, we were dancing all night and meeting people from all walks of society that we never would have met had we not got into this scene. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, I'm not critical of that at all. It was a real eye-opener. Yeah. But simultaneously, I started this business while I was in the Marines. It was a network marketing business, and I was selling a few electronic products. When I sold a whole load and I realized I was quite good at it, I started introducing other people into my network, and it spread rapidly to Hong Kong. Met a very nice guy who you would have read about in my book, a Hong Kong Chinese guy, and I sponsored him into my network, and he just took this thing and ran with it. Before I knew it, we had almost 1,000 distributors in Hong Kong and China. Our first month of business, we turned over $100,000. So, of course, what option did I really have other than to put my notice in the Marines to move out to Hong Kong, where the majority of my business was? So that's what I did. I put my notice in. It was 18 months. The downside was, as the time drew nearer for me to leave the Marine Corps, our business kind of went downhill more and more. And I have to say, in my defense, it was no fault of our own. It was just that the company that we were selling products for was having problems, and they were failing. They couldn't bring out new inventions quick enough. And as such, all these 1,000 people that we had, pretty much across Asia and then other parts of the world, they lost interest, and our profits, or our turnover went from $100,000 to something inconsequential, like $2,000 a month. I mean, it was nothing.
Yeah.
At the same time, I was racking up debts because we were having to put on a lot of business functions, and we were having to travel abroad, and so I was getting quite heavily in debt. And then, of course, the month approached when I was actually leaving the Marines. So I got on the train here in Plymouth to go up to Gatwick and catch a flight to Hong Kong. And, I no longer had my military career behind me. I no longer had money in the bank. In fact, I just had quite huge debts. And, of course, I had this niggling thing inside me that I knew being involved with drugs probably wasn't putting me in the best frame of mind to be attacking this international, Yeah. So I got to Hong Kong, and it pretty immediately became apparent this business was going nowhere. We have an expression here in the UK. You probably have the same thing, but I told them to stuff it.
Yes.
I won't say where I told them to stuff it, but I wasn't going to be anywhere in school.
Right. We get it. Yeah,
I've really worked hard at this thing for a year, and when the head office tried to put it back on me, I just said, sorry, I'm out of here, goodbye. Well, of course, I'm stranded in Hong Kong then. I was very fortunate my business partner offered to put me up. Otherwise, I don't know what I would have done.
Yeah,
and I
remember that.
And as you remember, I took the first job that came along, which was selling computer memory chips in this crazy, a crazy old school Chinese trading company, run on very much ancient Chinese values. I was very bored every day compared to being in the Marines. It was, you really don't want to be in an office job when you've traveled the world, parachuting out of airplanes and stuff. And so
now you're sitting at a desk with the old school technology,
and not only that, but I couldn't engage in it because at that point I didn't speak any Cantonese, and because the computer market is so fickle. If you haven't got the contacts, you haven't got the experience behind you, you're not going to sell anything. So there'll always be someone that can buy and sell it cheaper. So I pretty much sat in this company for 6 months, not selling a thing. The boss wasn't bothered because in his Chinese psyche, and I don't mean that to be offensive, but in his mind, having Westerners working in his office looked really great when clients came to visit. You know, it's kind of, hey, look at me, I can afford an international sales team. So it was on one of these days when I got introduced to crystal meth, purely by chance. I'd gone to use the toilet in the building one time, and one of my colleagues walked out, and there was this funny smell, and so I said, hey, well, you know, what are you up to? And he said, hey, Chris, come in here, and, you know, we went in the cubicle, and he took out crystal meth.
And smoking, yeah.
Yeah, and, you know, I was never one to give up, to miss out on a new experience. So, of course...
Right, that's the thing. It's another exciting new experience, yeah.
Yeah, you know, people talk about drug pushers, and they make it sound like there's these evil people that are just out there to ruin people's lives. And it was nothing like that. I wanted to try it. I was happy. Right. There was no chance I was not going to try it. You know, that's just how I am.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's the same way with me. I've been drinking alcohol. I mean, I had fun drinking alcohol at a certain point, you know, in the beginning. And I tried drugs, too. It's like, oh, I'll try this, too. You know, this would be fun. I mean, it wasn't like I was out there. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. It starts out as fun. And I think a lot of us in recovery probably, well, that's just the way the disease is. It's fun when you start out. It even seems to be helping and enhancing your talents and abilities, right? I mean, that's the way it works on the brain.
Yeah.
It's later that it gets painful.
Yeah. In treatment terms, they call that the pre-contemplated phase of addiction.
Yes,
you know, you have cycle addiction, and it's the stage where everything's rosy, everything seems to be right. You know, this thing's making me feel good. I'm experiencing new things and new people. I'm finding out that I'm actually good at certain things, you know, or at least, you know, while the drugs effects last. And they call that the pre-contemplated phase, where you have no reason to want to address this issue. You know, there is no reason to it at that time.
Right.
So
not at that point.
And the other thing was, you know, I'd done the party thing for 2 years. I'd done all the other, you know, pretty much all, you know, all the party drugs, and you know, and I still, you know, I know it's a cliche, but I still got up in the morning and I went to work. You know, it wasn't an issue. But when I tried crystal meth, it was different.
That was the one. Yeah.
I would have been
a
fool
I mean, I know
myself.
what you mean, because I had that too. I think everyone in addiction, there are things that we're using, and then there'll be the one that just rings the bell. You know, it is the jackpot, and that's the one that it becomes a drug of choice, and it becomes the obsession. Am I right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think for some people it's alcohol. For others, for me, it was meth. I know what you mean. It was when I tried crystal meth, because I'd been doing coke. For years I had tried coke. But when I did meth, it became obsessive. I felt so in control when I was using meth. There was just something there. And, I just had to interject that, because I think all of our listeners are relating to this.
Right. You're quite right, and I think it would be helpful for your listeners to see how the cycle, you know, works, and we can talk more about that.
Yes. And don't give away all of your book, because we're going to want to order it and read it, and don't tell everything.
Yeah. But I mean, in a nutshell, I knew there and then that I was addicted to it. That pretty much, you know, I didn't have this kind of denial thing. I was in denial I guess I was in denial of where it was heading, but, you know, I wasn't foolish enough to know that, you know, the second I got up out of my seat when we finished work that day, I knew where I was going, and it was to the nearest drug dealer. And I knew what I was going to buy.
Yep.
And that was crystal meth. The guy actually said, Chris, sorry, I've sold my last packet. Do you want some heroin? Well, again, this kind of willingness to try anything. I said, yeah, I'll give that a go. And it wasn't, for me, it was nothing the same. It wasn't anything like crystal meth. It wasn't something I really wanted to follow up on, although I probably would if it was put in front of me. It was the meth, and I started to find myself trying to get home from work every day. And it started off once a week, and then it went to twice a week, then it went to 3 times a week. I was going to find this drug dealer in the crummiest part of Hong Kong, and I knew what I wanted. I wanted, $10 worth of meth. I was going to go home, I'd sit and smoke it on my own, and I knew that out of that all kinds of creativity would come. I would while away the dark hours writing, create song lyrics. I got into drawing these Japanese cartoons, and all the stuff I was told I was a failure at school, I was suddenly there realizing, no, actually I wasn't. I just never had the right support or the right gateway to chaperone me through to find out that I can do these things, So why would you not want to love that situation? That's how it developed, and that job finished, about a month later, and I started working in the nightclubs as a nightclub doorman.
Yeah.
The idea was if I work in the nighttime, then I won't be able to do the drug, right? But of course, that's not how addiction works. I worked in the nighttime and I did the drug, and then it just got to the point, and there was no discernible point, but it just got to the point where I was doing it every night. And I won't even say I was doing it all the time, because the effect of meth is so strong.
And stays with you a while.
Just a few puffs before I went to work, not only had me feeling great and probably doing a tip-top job, because, I was good with the customers. I felt happy. I felt comfortable.
Right.
I wouldn't have to then smoke it again until the next night. And then, of course, that night comes around where you haven't slept for 3 days, and then it becomes a case of, I have to smoke it tonight,
Right.
This is not a luxury. I'm not doing this out of luxury. I have to, because if I don't, I'm going to be asleep on the job, literally.
Literally, your brain and body need it to support life, and that happens with alcohol too. You people who have where alcohol is their drug of choice, they've got to have a little. They call it here in America the hair of the dog that bit you. They have to be able to they get up with a hangover. Well, I'm going to have a little taste of a little something, and then I'm going to go through my work day, So, but it's because the brain's become dependent on the substance because it's anyway. Well, you know all that.
No, you make a good point, Marty, because
looking back, you realize, wow, the things that this drug supposedly unlocked, like you were talking about finding a gateway for the creativity. I know I experienced some of that too. Like years later in recovery, I realized that it's just that drug happened to release my inhibitions or make me feel happy enough that I would allow the possibility that I could be good at things that I had formerly been told, had been smacked down by somebody in the past and, had accepted that, I can't. But, it opened the possibilities. And I found that in recovery, all the possibilities open up again, because once the brain starts to heal, there's the beginning of recovery where everything's kind of difficult and slow going because your brain is rebuilding, but then everything opens up again, and then there are possibilities, and you uncover all these new talents and skills that you had thought were off limits to you. And I've seen this happen again and again with people in recovery, and I'm just wondering if you had that same thing, because when I look at your bio and I see all these things you've done in recovery, I know that you must have had that. Hasn't recovery unlocked that kind of a gateway in you, that kind of freedom?
Yeah, well, the cycle of change model, it's very unique in as far as, whether people can relate to it or not. Everybody coming out of addiction goes through the cycle. And
Right.
As I said before, you have the honeymoon period where everything's wonderful, and the drug or the alcohol is it's getting you what you want, and then you start to come up against barriers, and that can be the tiredness, the feeling sick. You've lost a few friends by this time. Your finances aren't too healthy. You've maybe, been kicked out of your place a couple of times by this. And then you enter what's called the contemplative phase, where you start thinking, hang on, this is not quite getting me what I want anymore. If anything, it's doing the opposite.
Right. It starts to dawn on you. Uh-oh. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like a seesaw. When the downside, when the deficit starts to outbalance the good points, you can only really make the decision that, hey, I've got to get my seesaw balanced again. It's going to be the only way. So if I'm going to do that, I've got to take some action. And I'm going to probably need support. I'm going to need some people around me that understand what I'm going through. And what happens is when you take action and maybe you have a period of abstinence, or some people are able to really cut down their use, then all those
I wasn't one of those people.
Well, it's there's no kind of set rule in addiction, is there?
Right. I know.
I guess the point I'm making is when you have a period off the drugs, or at least controlled, all those good things in your life that are gone, they start to come back in again. You start to get your friends back. You maybe get a job, which you haven't previously been able to do because you were too wasted all the time. People start saying nice stuff to you. You get a bit of money in the bank. Maybe you haven't had a vacation for like 3 or 5, or some of my clients' cases, they'd never been on holiday. They'd never ever been anywhere.
Never had vacation.
So, exactly. So maybe you go on vacation, and what happens is you start to build up so much capital in your life that's positive.
Yeah.
That you start to see, I can't go back into the addiction phase.
Right.
But of course,
because recovery is such a benefit that you realize that it's the new lifestyle that you're building. That's how I define recovery, is building a new lifestyle. Yeah.
But then of course, because you've programmed your brain over such a long period to get instant gratification and instant reward by taking a substance, the second you get on a bit of rocky ground and your self-esteem takes a hit, or you're feeling low, or it could be that you're feeling really happy, naturally your psychological programming says, go and take the drug, and you forget all the good stuff that you've created, and you go back into the cycle again.
Yeah, we call that euphoric recall. And that do you have that in the UK? I mean, with relapse, the person entertains a thing called euphoric recall, where they look back to the time when they were drinking or using and say, oh, wow, I didn't have these problems then. All I need is to get, they romanticize and build it up like it was this wonderful, wonderful thing, and can't remember any of the pain that was involved with the addiction and the disastrous consequences. And they think, well, I just need a drink or a drug, right? And then the relapse occurs, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And you can have, we used to call it a lapse, which is where you have one night, one night out on the thrash, and you spend all your money, and the next morning you wake up and think, hang on, why did I do that? I'm not going there again. Or you can have the relapse. You have the relapse where you go full on back into the circle, and your brain solely focuses on the reward mechanism, and you cannot rationalize all those good things that had come back into your life,
Right.
But then, of course,
so
you go around. You go around the circle a bit. Sorry.
Right. That's why there's an emphasis on relapse prevention in recovery. We all take steps to build ourselves against relapse. I build ourselves up against relapse, to be strong against relapse. And one of the things to do, I think, is to remember daily remember the lowest point or one of the low points, just recall how bad it was, you know, like remember where you came from and remember where you're going, because that kind of introduces that memory, not to dwell on it and, you know, in regret or something negative, but just to remember, wow, I'm so glad I'm not there anymore, right? So you don't slip into that carelessness of thinking that it was cool. But you know, I really think what you're talking about is brilliant, and the way that you're describing the cycle is brilliant. I wanted to ask you. I think some people may ask you this. I don't know. If, I think I understand this answer, but I think it may be. Let me just ask this on behalf of maybe if somebody, because this. If has anybody ever asked you that they find a hard time, that they're having a hard time believing that somebody as tough as you are, with all your military background and everything, would find themselves caught in the web of addiction? And I know how that happens but I'm just wondering if you've had anybody ever ask you that, like say, oh, you're so strong and you're so brave. You were in the Royal Marines and you did all this stuff. How did you happen to just fall into this pattern? And you've already told us because of this cycle that you've described, right? But do people ever ask you that?
Yeah, I guess.
Because it's not a weakness. You know, addiction's not a weakness. So strong people do become addicted because it's not a weakness. But I think people think of it as a weakness. Do you have anything to say about that, or?
Yeah, I guess a distinction, it helps if people can understand the distinction between self-confidence and self-esteem, which are two very different things.
Excellent.
You know, even, how can I say, my own example, you know, I had a very fractured childhood. Mm-hmm. I don't actually talk about it because it's in the past.
Right.
B, a lot of water has gone under the bridge with respect to, you know, my relationships with
I'm
certain
with you, brother.
people.
I have a similar thing. Yeah.
You know, but you need to understand. I joined the elite Royal Marines because I wanted to prove, you know, I guess I kind of wanted to prove something to people, and I had the self-confidence to get through it. That wasn't the issue. Mm-hmm. Underneath, you know, underlying that self-confidence was actually probably a dodgy self-esteem. And I hope I'm making sense here.
Explain what you mean by dodgy. I love that. I love that British slang, but explain what dodgy means.
Oh, sorry.
Anybody.
I kind of had a rocky self-esteem, you could say. You know, when you've been kicked from pillar to post a lot of your life, you can be the angriest person in the world, and that means you go out there and you get a lot for yourself. You know. Yeah. I mean, for example, when I was parachuting in the military, always made sure I was the first guy, you know, out of the door of the C-130. You know, I couldn't show fear. I had to set the example for all those following me, and I would throw myself out, laughing my head off, you know?
Yeah.
That self-confidence. You know?
Yeah.
That self-confidence.
I relate to that.
Yeah. Underlying
I did stand-up comedy. I didn't parachute, but I did stand-up comedy, and it can be kind of scary. And I know that kind of state of mind, you know, to be to get in there and just like, yahoo.
Yeah, that can fool people into thinking, wow, this guy's got it made. You know, he does this, he does that. He's not.
Right.
But they don't, you know, but they don't see what's going on beneath the surface. And I guess there's that analogy, isn't there, about the duck. You know, you see the swan. You see the swan on top of the surface of the lake, and she looks beautiful and calm and serene. But underneath the surface, she's paddling like hell, you know, to stay alive, kind of thing. And that's the difference between confidence and that's the difference between confidence, self-confidence, and self-esteem. So, you know, addiction's something that I think it's very strongly related to that lack of self-esteem. You know,
it is.
For me, crystal meth was the key in the lock. I always describe it as the key in the lock. It was the one thing that just turned something in my brain, and it made me feel the complete person, so that my confidence matched, for the first time ever, my outgoing confidence matched my inner lack of self-esteem, because they leveled out. And, of course, it's a false sense of leveling, but you know, that's just how it is.
But the drug gave you
Yeah, so that's how you can have a really, what society might deem a very successful person who's actually really struggling underneath. And this this is a very complex web. It goes back to your childhood. It goes back to, you have this thing called attachment theory. When you're a little toddler, how much love your parents showed you, and in what way, and whether they were tactile, and it secures you as a person if it's done properly from a young age. Yeah. And you can grow up to be very, professional, calm, cool, level-headed, go-getting kind of character. I wouldn't like to. Yeah, sure.
I'm sorry. Oh, I was just going to ask you. In recovery, though, did you find? I mean, I think the process of recovery, with time, we gain the self-esteem without the chemical dependency, right? I mean, you discovered and you built your self-esteem on your journey in recovery. Am I right? I mean, I think because what you said was really brilliant. The key is the self-esteem, and I think that's true for many people with chemical dependency. And so in recovery, it's a process of building self-esteem, and we learn that as we go along. And I know I had the exact same thing. I was conscious of the fact that I needed to begin to esteem myself and appreciate myself and treat myself right. And a lot of the process of addiction, the steps that we take in addiction, those steps that we take in recovery help us to restore our self-esteem, or in some cases just to build a self-esteem that was never there in the first place. But that's what I think is so cool about recovery, that there are things, I finally found out who I am, who I really am. I found that out in the course of my recovery. I'm just wondering if you've had a similar experience.
It's fascinating that you ask, Marti, because I know in myself, even as I sit here now talking to you, I'm pretty much that same little kid that was, getting kicked around when I was like 3 or 4 years old. I still feel the same person. And I'm not sure whether it's about building that self-esteem, although undoubtedly certain achievements in life undoubtedly build your self-esteem. But I guess an equally as big an element is getting happy with yourself.
That's what I meant by self-esteem. Yeah, just learning to like yourself and forgive yourself. I think that's part of the process, right?
Yeah, and understanding that, you are who you are, and this is your makeup, and,
acceptance,
and then also appreciating that probably quite a few other people around you have similar issues, but don't dwell on them. Does that make sense?
Hey, we've still got some time left, and I just wanted to be sure and talk about you. Now, your website is ChrisThrall.com, right? ChrisThrall.com. And your book is Eating Smoke, and it's available just everywhere. Do you have anything you want to tell our listeners for how to get a hold of you or how to get a hold of your book?
Yeah, anyone's always welcome to email me through my website. I've built quite a few.
That's how I got a hold of you.
Yeah, I got a
people
a
at
few
work.
pleasurable.
You can get a hold of Chris Thrall. Yeah.
Yeah,
it works.
I built some good relationships with people that way. My book's available in the USA. It's probably best to look for it on Amazon. Slightly different here in the UK because I've just got another publisher for it. So we're in the process now of finalizing a contract for that.
For the second book?
No, this is for Eat and Smoke. I got it. My initial publishing deal was with a company in Hong Kong.
Oh yeah,
yeah. I've now managed to kind of, I'm not even sure the right word for it, but to sublet the rights for the book to a company here in the UK.
Okay.
So it's going to have a second wind here, you can say.
Good.
I'm in talks at the moment with a Hollywood producer, which is quite well. It's you know yourself, Marty. You don't hold out too much hope in as a writer.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, everyone wants
to going. Yeah, but it's like jumping out of that plane, right? You know, woo-hoo, focus on the fun. Whatever the outcome, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much all the feedback I get from Eating Smoke is, when is this going to be a Hollywood movie?
Yeah.
And I think that really says something about the nature of the book.
Yeah, it's wonderful. It's very visual. People, I really recommend this book, and go on Amazon. It's on there. That's where I got it. It's an excellent book, widely distributed, wonderful book. Very well reviewed, and an international bestseller. I think it was #1 in England on several lists, as I recall. One of them was best books to read on a plane, and I mean, it's a big successful book, and it should be. I wanted to ask you one last thing, because of this badass, all this stuff you're doing, and I mean that, I don't know if they say that in England, but in America, badass is a good thing. At least coming from me, it is. And and I think what I see with you, with your profile, and with your past in the military, and then also with all these really exciting things that you've done, all these experiences that you've had and continue to have in your recovery, I'm thinking that you really embrace life, and I'm wondering if there's any survival skills, for instance, that you learned in your in the military, or anything from your extreme training that you use in recovery. Is there anything like that? I mean, because some of us haven't done all these things you have. Do they help, or? Because I know with me, stand-up has helped me in recovery. The things I learned from facing challenges in stand-up comedy.
Yeah, and in my opinion, doing stand-up is far more scary than battling addiction. So
no, I'm talking about. Yeah, but I mean, look at all the stuff you've done. I would never. I have fear of heights. I'm working on chipping away at that. I just ziplined this year for the first time. But this stuff you're doing, I mean, I can't even imagine. Oh my gosh, But I'm wondering, is this? Have you found? And I know I found that sometimes doing something that's challenging, like a scary thing, can actually it can help to build your courage, and it's kind of a thrill. And I know we don't want to get hung up on thrill seeking where it becomes compulsive, but do you think that played a part in your recovery, like doing all these things? Was that something that you have used in your recovery, like so you wouldn't get bored with recovery, for instance, like you did over at the office there in Hong Kong? You don't want to get bored and bail out of recovery.
Well, I don't know. It might help your listeners if I just tell you kind of how that came about.
Okay.
When I got back from Hong Kong, I spent a little bit over a year there. I came back to the UK. We don't have a crystal meth problem in the UK, so that's kind of one. It's starting to take off now, and it's available if you know the right people, in the big cities. But we don't have, like this Breaking Bad manufacturing process It's
well, I don't think that was really true to life, but yeah, I know what you mean.
we don't have Heisenberg.
Yeah.
We have Heisenberg here yet, but so
yeah.
You know, I was left with the next strongest substance, which, as you know, is speed. You know, just regular amphetamine. And I dabbled in that for 3 years. I still had the same mindset that, you know, I'm going to get stuff done. You know, I'd wake up, my house would be a mess. You know, I hadn't spoken to a friend for weeks.
Yeah, you never get anything done.
You know,
and then you get amped up and
couldn't get anything done. And I kept telling myself, well, if I buy more drugs, then I'm going to get up this energy and I'm going to keep hiding my plate. You know, I'm going to
I'm just laughing because, you know.
Yeah, I know it.
I'm just laughing because it's so true. It's so typical. Yeah. Like, if I just get enough of this or that substance.
So I guess
go ahead.
Towards the end of my, what must have been 3 years, if not a bit more, of kind of dependency on this chemical, I woke up one morning and I was laying on the floor of my front room. You know, I hadn't even gone to bed. I didn't go to bed for 2 years. I just slept on the couch if I slept at all. And the thing that got me is I'd had a house in Plymouth at this stage for about 10 years. Mm-hmm. I was very lucky that in Hong Kong I thought I'd lost my house because I certainly didn't pay the mortgage. But when I got back to the UK, I found the book. Well, I was very lucky. When I got back to the UK, I found out that my father had rented my house out for me. So I managed to keep a hold of the mortgage. And during the time I lived here, one of the things that was the most special to me is I always had really good relationship with all the kids in my street. I live in kind of, I guess you'd call it a suburb, on a typical English housing estate. Always love kids and always try and take a bit of time for them. And it got to the stage where they'd come knocking on my door, Chris, come out and play football, Chris. And we'd go out and we'd just play wacky games in the street, and we'd go trick-or-treating and all dress up and this kind of stuff. But it got to the stage of my addiction where my life became, I guess, so depraved and feel so self-conscious about where I was at that I woke up this day and I was in my boxer shorts lying on my front room floor. I think I had a screwdriver in my hand, and I realized what had happened. I've been trying to fix my TV set, and I was that exhausted from having stayed awake for so many nights. I literally collapsed into unconsciousness. I woke up, I was cold, hungry, tired, exhausted. And I was too ashamed to go out of my house because I couldn't face either the kids that I've been friends with for 10 years or their parents saying, Chris, you're not quite looking yourself these days, you know? And I realized I was ashamed to go out the house. And I think that was my moment of enlightenment.
Yeah, right.
I think I had probably, I didn't realize it at the time, but I guess I was having a nervous breakdown. And I burst into tears. I think at the moment I burst into tears, my nose exploded from my blood pressure. And blood just sprayed over the whole of my front room. And I just sat there crying like a baby. I sat crying like a baby, and then I managed to laugh at it, you know, because you ask about the Marines, one of our core attributes is you must always possess a sense of humor.
When you face that.
Adversity. Yeah.
Oh, man,
when you face
adversity. Go to war with England. I mean, go to war on your side next time. Well, we've been on your side every time, haven't we? Good thing we have. So that's a fundamental of the Marines, is to have a sense of humor. I love that.
Cheerfulness under adversity. You can't beat it. You know, you've always got to have a smile on your face and a joke at the ready, even in the most extreme of circumstances. So
I've been doing that my whole life. I know that it really works too, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, not to say
pick myself up,
Yeah.
Marty, and it was that day when I had to look at myself in the mirror, you know, and I had to say, Chris, what are these drugs actually doing for you?
Right.
And I had to be honest with myself and say, Chris, ever since those first few months when it was the glory days, the honeymoon period, they haven't done anything for you. All they've done is seen you go more and more downhill, more isolated, more lonely, more ashamed of yourself. Most of my relationships had gone. And I looked myself in the mirror and I said, am I going to settle for this? Is this it? And I said, no, I'm not. And I knew there and then, you know, I wasn't going to become an angel. You know, for me, the drugs was never the issue. It was the addiction that was the issue. And I had many good times, you know, out with friends, taking drugs, partying, dancing, whatever. And I made a promise to myself that I was going to get my seesaw back in balance. And so I began cutting down on the substances. So rather than take them every day when I had the money, I was able to see that if I took them once a week, I could actually get stuff done on the rest of the days, and I could tidy my house, and I could bring a friend, and I could go out for dinner with somebody. And when my life started to build back up, well, then that was the motivation to stop doing it once a week and maybe once a fortnight, and then again.
Oh, so you tapered off? Is that what you did? You kind of tapered off? Oh, wow. I've never met anybody that tapered off. You're the first person I've ever met that tapered off.
Yeah,
I've always known people that have been either all or nothing at all.
I guess
it's wonderful.
You know, it's horses for courses, really. Do you have that expression, horses for courses? I fully appreciate. I fully appreciate some people get near death, and it's absolute or nothing for them. You know, it's just the way.
The gift of desperation. Have you ever heard that? The gift of desperation. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. Oh,
it's like, I'm going to die if I don't do this. Yeah.
Yeah, I can really understand that. So I made a promise to myself. I've got to cut this stuff down. I've got to get my life in balance. And I took a globe of the world, you know, one of these kind of globes that lights up and spins around. And I just pointed out all the places on the world that I wanted to travel. I made a mental note of all the sports that I wanted to do. And most of all, I had, you know, because I'd learned to develop empathy, which I hadn't had before, through the kindness of the few people that had stayed in my life and supported me and said very kind things to me, you know, at my lowest moments. I understood what it is to actually help others rather than, you know, tokenistically give to a charity twice a year or something. And I had an overwhelming desire to kind of give something back. And so I went to work in Africa, and I worked in a street children's school for 6 months in Mozambique. And I saved up the money for my training, which took 6 months. I went to a volunteer organization, which is based in Norway. And, you know, as I got on the plane to start this, not to start a new life, but to start chapter 2 of my life, you know, again, the tears just started pouring down my face, Marty, because I had no help from professionals. I had no AA groups, NA groups. I had no medication. I had no counseling. I had no therapy. I just had me, and I got myself out of this situation. And when I sat on that plane knowing I was going to spend 6 months at this volunteer school in Norway learning the skills to go to Africa, and that they had an abstinence policy in the school for exactly like, you know, people who had been where, you know, I was very proud of myself, you can say. And the tears started pouring down my face, and I flew out there to Norway, and the second I stepped off that plane, the person I used to be. I wasn't feeling sorry for myself. I wasn't damaged in any way. I wasn't feeling inadequate or lesser than other people. I was Chris Thrall again, and I went out and I had such a brilliant time at this school. I was able to be an example for the other people. I took I led the sports and the running. I taught people how to ski. I fundraised so much money for the organization out street fundraising for projects in Africa, that I was awarded the second level commendation of Finland for my efforts, which was nice. And they granted it to me on the grounds of human generosity, which was flattering.
Yeah.
And then,
so we've only got a couple minutes left. I hate this because we've only got a couple minutes left, but this is so beautiful. What I'm hearing, Chris, is that your path to healing came through service to others. Could that be
very
fair?
much.
And
that's how it initiated.
Yeah, and that's how it initiated. And then it went on. Oh, this is a wonderful story. It's so fascinating. You've been a brilliant guest. The time has just flown by. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. And do you like your life now? I kind of know the answer, but I just am asking. How do you like your life now?
Marty, I have the same problem.
Come on, tell me you love it. Tell me you love it. Huh?
I don't think it's a case of loving it. I think it's a case of accepting that life is ups and downs. And when you're down, you have to adopt the mindset that you're going to be back up again. You have to adopt the mindset that nobody ever said life is fair. You have to appreciate that whatever state you're in, you're an awful lot better than many other people, many other disenfranchised people in this world. You've got to get up in the morning and you've got to smile even when you don't feel like smiling. And then you go for it and you go out, you set your goals, you don't accept no, and they will come to you. And I hope my story is, proof of that. But
perfect and brilliant. And we're going to have to wind up now.
Brilliant.
Just I've got a couple minutes, but I've been. I think we're going to have to wind up. But just you couldn't have ended it better with that wrap up. And you're wonderful. And I hope that we get a chance to have you back on the show when you do another. Please get a hold of me if you have anything to tell us. Again, get a hold of me, and I'd love to have you back on as a guest, whether it's for your next book or anything else you'd like to share.
Marty, thank you ever so much for having me, and to your listeners, thank you for listening.
Thank you, Chris.